I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review, where we use our AI DesignEye to have a look at a previous competition piece of mine and give us an analysis based on the principles and elements of design, which is how we are judged in most competitions. This week we're looking at a line from a poem. The poem is called Black Bonnet by Henry Lawson, an Australian poet, and the line is by Barren Creeks, and the rest of it is The Bushman Loves. So this was from a competition where over 2 weeks all the class titles were related to poetry, a lot of it Australian poetry, and this particular design was staged on a bench 70 centimetres wide and judged from the front. We had to use Australian floral plant material in the design as well. So as you can see here, I've used the base, which is the slice from a banksia tree, and then a native Australian palm tree, the Bangalore palm spathe, and some bark across the back of the design. And in that, I've just collected some banksia flowers and a little bit of foliage material from the banksias as well. Some of the banksias are at the back of the design in the bark, as though they had been swept there by the creek flowing through, which was now dry and barren. This design was awarded first place, and I was particularly delighted because I struggled with how to interpret that particular line. I knew that I wanted it to be the creek bed and I wanted it to look barren in some sense, but the tendency when we're doing a lot of competition is to think about a landscape design or a naturalistic design, and I really wanted it to be neither of those things particularly. In terms of the design, it isn't, because, well, it's not a landscape design because it doesn't depict everything that would be in the landscape, and it's not a naturalistic design because they're not placed in the way that they would grow. They're certainly placed in the way that you might find them in a creek bed, but also the mix of banksia that I've used wouldn't necessarily grow together, and that's only something that an Australian judge would know, so it wouldn't in this country fit into a naturalistic design either. So I'm happy with that, happy with the way it came out, very happy with the result, and I feel that one of my focus areas for my design is about texture and textural contrast, and I think that I've nailed it in this particular design. But let's see now what DesignEye has got to say about the design in terms of the principles and elements of design, as well as what might enhance it or improve it even further. Looking at balance, first of all, the design is asymmetrically balanced with a visual weight concentrated on the right side where the banksia elements are clustered. The curved bark piece on the left side, or that's the palm spathe in fact, creates a counterbalance, ensuring stability and avoiding a sense of heaviness on one side. So because I've got the spathe facing away from where it would be judged, I get the balance of that higher side of the spathe. The use of the log in the background provides a horizontal anchor, reinforcing a grounded feel. So what it sees is the log is actually a piece of bark, curled bark, but I'm happy that in essence, looking at it, the AI has determined that there's balance and grounds the design. Proportion and scale. The scale of the materials is well chosen, with the large curved bark piece acting as a dramatic focal point, so that's the palm spathe again. So just in terms of when you might put in a design of yours to have it assessed, I haven't gone through these comments and adjusted them based on the image, but when you submit a design, we have AI do the analysis, and then a human judge will look at the analysis and the image that you've sent and actually adjust the analysis to make it relatable to the image. So had I gone through this, I would have changed all of the places where it says the large curved bark piece and made it, this is a palm spathe. And same with the log in the previous one. Rather than say it was the log, I would say this is the bark piece because I can recognise that that's what it is. So you're always going to get feedback that is useful and related to your particular image. It won't just come automatically out of AI. We will review it before we send it to you. The banksia elements are in harmony with the overall structure, but could be slightly varied in size to add more natural diversity. And that's an interesting comment. I hadn't thought about that. I probably just thought, I've got all these Banksias, I'll throw them all in as though, as I said, as though they've been swept down by the creek. But even in saying that, there would be all different sizes that would be swept down by the creek. So that's something that I will need to take note of. The log and base ensure that the composition remains cohesive and proportionally well structured. So whilst you can't see a lot of the base, it does lift it off the bench. And you can imagine that if that base, that slice of Banksia underneath the spade wasn't there, that it would look not as balanced because the spade would be on the bench. And what happens when we put things on the bench without any space between the bench and your design is that the bench essentially becomes part of the design. And so it detracts from the overall use of the space that you put into a design. Rhythm and movement. The curving bark creates a strong sweeping movement guiding the eye from left to right across the composition. So that's the spade. The placement of the Banksia elements follows this directional flow, reinforcing the natural undulations of an arid creek bed. So that's good, got that one right. The dried foliage adds a sense of lightness and contrast, creating gentle movement among the more solid elements. So that's the Banksia foliage that is semi-dried because they have been out of water for a little bit of time. And so it introduces another colour, but not a bold colour, not a solid colour, so it doesn't detract from the colour palette that I've chosen to use in this design. Contrast and dominance. The contrast between textures is particularly striking. Rough Banksia cones, smooth bark and fine dried leaves create a dynamic interplay. The dominant elements are the curved bark or the spade and Banksia flowers, which naturally draw attention. Colour contrast is subtle, maintaining an earthy palette, though slight variation in tones, a darker or lighting element, might enhance the impact. And I guess I would have to look at that in terms of the colours. I like the earthy palette, but I could probably have a darker green in there in some sense. Once again, it's barren creek, so to my mind, nothing too green would grow in a barren creek. So I'd have to still think about perhaps something darker again, maybe into the seed pod, dark brown or black even. But let's see what else there are in the suggestions and the analysis. Unity and harmony. Design maintains a consistent Australian native theme, ensuring unity. The natural materials work together seamlessly, evoking a sense of place and storytelling. The soft yellow-green foliage lightens the composition, preventing it from feeling too heavy. So that's a good tip, is that had I not used that foliage, it would have been too dark and perhaps looked too dense, too packed together, shall we say. Very technical term, packed together. Line. Strong flowing lines are created by the curved bark, the spade, giving the design an organic and dynamic structure. The Banksia forms and log provide horizontal stability, while the dried foliage adds delicate fine lines. So all of that has come into all of the other things that we've had analysed already. Texture. One of the design's strongest features is the textural contrast between the rough Banksia cones, smooth bark and delicate dried foliage. The log or the bark in the background reinforces the rugged feel of the outback landscape. If you've watched any of my other videos or analyses, you will know that texture is one of the things that I try to focus on in terms of contrast in a design. That's just my choice. Sometimes people in their design journey will focus on line or on rhythm or one of the other elements or colour perhaps, but for me it's texture. Because I like working with Australian native material, there is always the opportunity to have textural contrast in the designs, and so I've grown very accustomed and comfortable to finding that that is the feature of my designs, particularly after 20 years. Colour. The earthy neutral palette effectively conveys the barren dry creek bed theme. The yellow-green leaves add a subtle pop of brightness, enhancing depth and contrast. Adding a slightly darker or redder toned element, perhaps a dried seed pod or birkwood, could introduce greater colour depth, and I like the idea of that. I think the dried seed pod we can get in this country, I don't know how many of you will be familiar with it, but it's a thing called a black bean seed pod, so it's about that long. Very dark brown on one side and the lighter sort of shades on the other, but it's got the places for all of the seeds, and so that's an interesting smooth yet rough texture. Again, I'd be looking at textural contrast, but it would slide in nicely because of the length of it. It would slide in nicely without being out of scale or proportion with the rest of the design. And I'd probably, and perhaps even the burnt wood, because that might be something that would be seen in a barren creek, would be a little bit of a burnt branch or some timber. So those are things that I could consider as well. Space. The use of negative space is well considered, preventing overcrowding and allowing the design to breathe. The central area remains open, emphasising the natural flow of the creek bed. A small extension or additional curved element on the right could slightly balance the composition without overwhelming it. That's another interesting comment. And perhaps if I had the seed pods, which can be slightly curved, or the burnt element, the burnt branch that was curved over, that would be something that would add that extension that it's looking for there. Things that I would try in terms of the design, just hold them up and see whether that made it a little bit more polished or not. It's all things that we can try with designs. So now on to some suggestions for what we could do. Enhance variation in Banksia ornaments. So as it talked about earlier, slightly varying the size and positioning of the Banksia cones could create more depth and a more organic look. They are very pushed together, and I guess I could have had them wider and then narrower, as though the water had caught them up in different ways and made it a more organic flow with the actual positioning of those Banksia cones. Introduce a darker or warmer toned element. Consider adding deeper coloured element, burnt wood, dark toned leaves, or a small red toned seed pod to create a stronger contrast and focus. What I think is interesting in this analysis is it hasn't suggested any more flowers, hasn't said you could use this flower or that flower, or even in saying that the darker toned leaves rather than a darker toned flower. So it obviously feels that the interpretation of the barren creek with just the elements that I've got there is the right way to go. Refine the right side balance. The right side, though strong, could benefit from a small counterbalancing element, perhaps an extension of the curved bark or a supporting branch. So I think the supporting branch is the thing that I would probably go for, and have it in a burnt tone so that it introduces that darker tone as well. Emphasise movement more strongly. The sweeping curve is effective, but extending the foliage slightly further outward could reinforce the sense of wind-blown movement, enhancing the storytelling of the design. And that's a good comment to have and a thing to try with the design, because it does, the more I look at it now, the more it looks like it's a little bit too dense in the centre, and I need to extend it out a bit more so that there is more movement, more gentle movement through the design. So overall, in the analysis of By Barren Creeks from the Black Bonnet poem by Henry Lawson, this is a beautifully executed design that effectively captures the raw beauty of the Australian creek beds, aligning well with its literary inspiration. The textural contrast, natural movement and organic balance make it a compelling and evocative piece. And that's a really nice way to finish this particular video, because it does, when I look at it front on, the way the judge would have seen it, it does present well. It does look balanced, it looks unified, it's got natural movement in it, the colour palette's right. Yes, it could have something on that right-hand side that would enhance the movement even further, but that's probably the only thing that even I can see that would finish it off nicely. So there is our analysis for this week. Join us again another time for another design. For now, I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review.